His Excellency Ravan Farhadi, the permanent representative of Afghanistan to the United Nations, first presented his credentials to the Secretary-General Boutros Ghali on 30 April 1993. Under the interim agreement for a new government in Afghanistan signed in Bonn, Germany, on 5 December 2001, he was requested to resubmit them. Since 1993, His Excellency has served as Vice Chairman of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People at United Nations Headquarters in New York. After a period as a political prisoner during the former Soviet Union's presence in Afghanistan, 1979 to 1980, he was an academic from 1985 to 1992, and later an associate professor in the Department of Near Eastern Studies at University of California, Berkeley. During the summer of 1985, he was a visiting fellow at the Australian National University in Canberra, and during the previous 4 years as associate professor at the University of Paris. He has served in many other political and diplomatic capabilities for Afghanistan. He received a bachelor's degree from Istiqlal College at Kabul in 1948 and holds institutes from University of, I won't even try the French, but in Paris, Department of International Relations, as well as a PhD from the École Pratique des Hautes Études of the University of Paris in 1955. He and his wife, who is with us today, are the parents of 3 children. Please join with me in welcoming to BYU His Excellency Ravan Farhadi.
Thank you very much. Well, the grandchildren was forgotten, but we have grandchildren also, of course. And I was very happy that we started with a prayer because we Muslims, we are instructed in our scripture, the Quran, to say to the Jews and to the Christians that your God and our God is the same. This is important. And so I start by the name of God, the beneficiary, the most gracious, and this is the formula for the Muslims. I'm so happy that there is this. I think you have it because it is information about Afghanistan. It has also a map, and this will facilitate for you the understanding of, and there are background information on Afghanistan. Now, this the war against Al-Qaeda and terrorism is, as the title has been given here, what I'll do is to tell you a little about what happened in Afghanistan in last 3 years, especially in last 3 years. And then you will, it's up to you to ask questions, and the questions I think will permit me to focus on points I've forgotten, and because I would like therefore my intervention to be brief, and I'll, in fact, by asking questions, you will generate my statement. Thank you very much. Now, what happened in Afghanistan was started 2 days ahead of 11th of September. On the 9th of September 2001, a leader was killed in Afghanistan. That leader was the one who have resisted against the Taliban and against the forces of bin Laden and against the Pakistani ISI inter-service intelligence, which was the military intelligence of Pakistan. Because these 3 forces were fighting in Afghanistan since some 5 years, and they had in Afghanistan, bin Laden had established his camps for the training of the terrorists. These terrorists were generally young Arabs coming from Arabic countries, and there were no Afghans among them, but the terrorists were more had a stamina, and their desire was to have to revenge against the United States, because especially of the policy of United States in the case of Israel and Palestine. This was the main reason, and that reason still unfortunately prevails. Now, what happened in Afghanistan, that man who was assassinated by two so-called journalists, Arab journalists, who had crossed Afghanistan from Europe, and they finally they obtained that interview, and then they killed Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was the leader of resistance of Afghanistan, because by that way bin Laden wanted to finish with the resistance in Afghanistan, because in Afghanistan the northeast of Afghanistan was never invaded by the Taliban, never invaded by Al-Qaeda, and therefore our country was divided by that time, and the northeast there was a provisional capital, and in the mission of Afghanistan in the United Nations was representing that portion of free Afghanistan. And the Taliban, they were never able to enter United Nations, because the West European countries, they did not agree with the Taliban and with their methods and their behavior against women, and this is why there was no possibility for them. I mean, the efforts of mission of Pakistan in order to have the Taliban to be accepted as representative of Afghanistan in the United Nations failed. The help came from West Europe, diplomatic help, not from the United States. The United States had kept relations with both sides, with our side. I mean, we had the government of Islamic State of Afghanistan, and also with the Taliban. The Taliban were coming to Washington, D.C., having their contacts, their talks. This was Clinton administration. And also our people, when they were coming, they were also had the possibility to contact and to talk with diplomats in the State Department. But of course, and they were informing United States. Our side was informing the United States that these Taliban are a danger for peace, and Al-Qaeda is a danger for peace. So this information was given all over since 96 up to 2001. But of course, the Clinton administration and the subsequent Bush administration did not listen to that anyway. And the embassy of Afghanistan in Washington, D.C. was was closed because they were saying that there is danger that the pro-Taliban and the other diplomats they fight with each other, and therefore this mission is not to be. The mission is not to be opened, and this is what happened for until 11th of September took place. 11th of September was a tragedy for the entire world. My wife and I, we were watching from because we live in Manhattan, we were watching the towers in smoke and falling. But we were so sad already, both of us, because of the death of the resistance leader 2 days earlier. In fact, the assassination of Ahmad Shah Massoud was a kind of, it was what's called in French avant-goût. It was a early taste of what would happen in New York and in Washington, D.C. So we had immediately, after 2 or 3 days, the contacts were started between our side because after the burial of Ahmad Shah Massoud, Afghanistan had enough resistance to continue the resistance. The resistance did not stop with the death of Ahmad Shah Massoud because he had for years established a system of resistance, and then we continued our resistance, and then we were asked by the United States government when we will fight the Taliban, when we will fight the Al-Qaeda, and when we will fight those who support Al-Qaeda and Taliban. We told them that since 5 years we are telling you that we have asked for your help. We ask for your assistance. Then things changed. And now the result is that today, 2004, we have 10,000s of American army in the boundaries of South and Southeast Afghanistan, tracing the remnant of the Taliban who sometimes commit acts of terrorism, and also maybe Mr. bin Laden, if he is anywhere in the tribal area in the Pakistani side of the boundaries, if he is there. But to come to this, we had a great events happened in Afghanistan. I say this because Afghanistan is completely different compared to Iraq. Iraq is a country where the United States took the decision to intervene militarily. Afghanistan, in the contrary, when the capital Kabul was liberated, no military of United States participated. The United States only gave the air cover to help those resistance who liberated Kabul. These were Afghans. So Afghans liberated Kabul. And then the rest of the country, and Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, and were liberated. So what was then left was two problems, the problem of security and problem of reconstruction. Because Afghanistan, with 23 years of war, and especially with the very harsh invasion of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, the Red Army, which had invaded Afghanistan, was completely destroyed. There was no infrastructure, and this has to be rebuilt. So this is how Afghanistan has facing these two problems. There was a conference in Tokyo in January 2002 for assistance to Afghanistan, where we had the United States, the Japanese, Germans, other countries of European Union, Italy, France. So they took a decision to help Afghanistan in its reconstruction. And recently, in end of April 2004, we had a meeting of the donors in Berlin, which was very important and took decision to assist Afghanistan for its reconstruction. Now we are facing the following situation. We have the question of security, and I think in spite of what's happening in the south of Afghanistan and in the border of the southeast, I'm sure that if Afghanistan receives enough help to constitute, to form a national army, then they can take care of their defense. But this, I mean, many efforts are needed for that, and especially for financial help. This is one. Number two is the question of reconstruction. Reconstruction of Afghanistan is to be taken care of first by the reconstruction of infrastructure. I mean, highways are to be rebuilt. This has started, but I hope that substantial efforts will be done in order the highways, the factories, what was destroyed in the course of 23 years of armed conflicts would be, when I say armed conflict, it was the armed conflict especially of in early years against the Soviet Union by the Mujahideen. Mujahideen were the freedom fighters in Afghanistan who, as good Muslim, were resisting against the Soviet power, and they succeeded because it happened that finally that in the time Mr. Gorbachev accepted that all the Soviet Union army evacuates Afghanistan. So this is a way for being defeated. This is what happened to the Soviets. But this was much earlier. Now, what we need in Afghanistan is also constitutional reform and legal reforms, and this is already started. We have now a constitution which was approved by 4th of January 2004, and which is a democratic constitution putting an emphasis on the human rights. And I hope that we'll have the elections in September 2004, and then a parliament which will, to which the president-elect, and I hope he will be Mr. Karzai, the president-elect will present a government, and that government will be then approved by the parliament and start to work. It is a country, this 24 million Afghans, they are of different ethnic groups. The main ethnic groups are the Pashtuns, who form 38% of the population. And then there are others, not only the Tajiks, but also the Uzbeks and the Hazaras and the Baluch. And these are, many of them, they have lived together in that country, and and they intermarry with each other. So therefore the ethnic groups, I hope, will not be a problem in Afghanistan in future, in spite of some extremists saying something, but generally there is good brotherhood between different and then there is a question of Sunni and Shia. As good students, you know about it, and you read in the papers about it. The Sunnis of Afghanistan constitute 82%, and the Shia some 18%. There is also a good understanding between the Sunni and the Shia in Afghanistan. There is no armed conflict or any, or even there is no news of any act of terrorism from one side to the other side, and they live together. In fact, the two sects of Islam, Sunni and Shia, are not, I mean, the creed is very similar in both sides, in both sects, and it must not become a case of armed conflict. I think that before giving you the possibility to ask questions, because I'm sure that you have good questions, I would like to say that Afghanistan is suffered a lot for long years. This was a country who did not participate in the Second World War, keep neutrality, but everybody was thinking that that neutrality will save Afghanistan for long years, and we were in the group of the non-aligned countries, but unfortunately we were the first country to be invaded by the Soviet Union. And the reason was given that they have been invited by a communist government, which came to power through a military coup. And now even the Russians, because now for today we have good relations with the Russians. The Russians also say that this was this was an error, and it was wrong for Russia to invade Afghanistan. Now they say there are no more people left who would approve that part of history of Soviet Union. So I hope that you will come here to monitor or to.
I can help select.
Yes, 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 please.
Any questions from the audience?
It seems like with these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, there's so much of a question, are things better? Do you think people feel that they are better off in Afghanistan now after the Taliban have been kicked out?
Yes, I can say that people feel much better that the Taliban kicked out, because the Taliban, they were, looking backward, and they were taking Afghanistan to a regime which would be unbearable for the Afghans, because the Afghans, it is 100%, almost 100% Muslim country, and that country would like to be with like other countries, other Muslim countries, other people in the Islamic world, to have a progress, to have education, especially education of girls, and that education of girls which started in 1929 in Afghanistan, but it was enhanced in 1939, but then the Taliban, they completely stopped it, and this was, I think, a very dangerous for Afghanistan. Now, the great difference between Iraq and Afghanistan is that in Afghanistan, as I told you, there was a force of resistance against the Taliban, which finally came back to liberate the capital, Kabul, and they were fighting in the northeast, but also near the capital, in the northern countryside, north of Kabul, for years. So the Taliban were never able to succeed. While in the case of Iraq is different, because there was a despotic regime in there, and then the war started by the decision of United States, and who tried to convince other countries, but it was not. These historical circumstances were completely different.
My question is regarding the warlords in Afghanistan. What kind of influence do you think they have on the political or human rights aspect in Afghanistan, and how can their influence be diminished, or should it be diminished?
What's called warlords in Afghanistan is a term vague which has many meanings. But in fact, if you give employment to people, people go for the employment because they're fed up with war, and nobody will follow the warlord if there is one. Now there are people who are called warlords. I give the example of a leader in Afghanistan, Ismail Khan in Herat, who has been the most successful in reconstructing the town, in the advancement of education, public health, including the education of the girls, and this is quite different. Therefore, this idea of warlords, which was always mentioned, was a kind of, it was exaggerated very much from the outset, from 2.5 years ago up to now. Of course, there are influential people, and I think Afghanistan needs a government to deal with them if they are not using military means against the government. And this is important, and I think with the parliament, they can be represented in a parliament. The so-called warlord may become a leader of a movement in the parliament. The so-called warlords may become the leader of agricultural progress, agriculture reform in some part of Afghanistan. So it is. I think this is not. I think these are the newspapers and the media which is exaggerating this concept.
You said that you hoped that Mr. Karzai would be the head of the government that was forming this fall, and I was wondering what particular qualities he has that you feel would make him most qualified for that, or why you hope that.
Well, I said this because personally I would vote for him, but it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed that because there are other candidates already, and they would like to. But of course, what is good with Mr. Karzai that he has already good experience for dealing with people, and that's very important in Afghanistan.
I have, I think, 3 questions. You stated that the war against Al-Qaeda and terrorism started before September 11 happened, and Commander Massoud and his people were fighting Al-Qaeda. But Osama bin Laden was giving sanctuary under the Ravan regime, who was in power between 92 and 96. When he came back from Sudan, he was giving citizenship of Afghanistan, not only him but many of his followers, and he was giving camps in Tora Bora and Kandahar. So how could a group fight against someone who has invited him, giving him that power? I probably would need some clarification that.
Okay.
And the second, you said against ISI, the first regime in Afghanistan is established by ISI in Pakistan, for which Mr. Mujahidi was going to be for 3 months and Ravani was going to be for 6 months, which he manipulated later, but that continued, resulted into the atrocities and killings and problems that emerged between 92 and 96, and many scholars claim that because of those atrocities, Taliban emerged as a result. And you stated that the Western European country did not support the Taliban because of their human rights or their women rights. Let me read you a statement that was published by the state of Afghanistan. It's called the Shari'i Fatwa of March 26, 1993, which states Afghanistan is...
1993?
Yes, March 26, 1993, of 1/5/1372 of the Afghanistan calendar, which states Afghanistan is an Islamic country. For the implementation of the rule of God in Islamic State, the government, the people of Afghanistan have fought for 14 years. From beginning, when the Islamic government of Afghanistan came to power until now, we still see with great sorrow and distress that women in Afghanistan are still working in public offices, radio and TV. We request the various government entities and agencies that women must be relieved from their jobs and their women must not be allowed to walk on the streets or in the cities. Schools for women, which in reality are the center of prostitution, must be closed, and also women must be thrown out from the radio and television. So the question is, what is the difference between the non-alliance people or the current non-alliance people or the Rabbani regime and the Taliban?
So, number one, the last words you quoted does not belong to any real Afghan leader. Nobody said that. It doesn't exist.
I do have the printed version in Persian, and I have the magazine that has printed.
No, but that magazine is pro-Pakistani magazine. Yes, this is, I don't believe in magazines, but nobody has said this in United Nations. Yes, I was in United Nations in '93, and I protested against what Pakistan is doing in Afghanistan. I would like to say that ISI of Pakistan has been an enemy of the Afghans because they were supporting Al-Qaeda. And as you know, Mr. bin Laden, who was in Afghanistan, he was supposed not to begin any military movement. He was supposed to, he had given his promise to be just living in Afghanistan as a kind of guest, refugee guest. But unfortunately, he never built a school in Afghanistan. He never built a hospital in Afghanistan. He just trained the terrorists. And these terrorists, their first job was to go to the front in Kunduz, and they were killing our children, these Muslim Arabs, in the time when Ahmad Shah Massoud was fighting them and resisting against them. If Ahmad Shah Massoud was not important, nobody would kill him. Why he was the suicide terrorist people executed him? Because he was a danger for the ISI, he was a danger against bin Laden. This is the history. But I would like to say that the case of women in Afghanistan was just a pretext, because this was a way that you can have the attention of the extremists in Pakistan and to send them to Afghanistan as by the name of the Taliban. This is what happened. I would like to, and this would be recorded in history all the time. And the way Pakistan was presenting the case in those times was exactly as that the one who asked me the question, and I am sure he's a Pakistani, is, but Pakistanis are our brothers, in spite of the fact that this damage was done by ISI in Afghanistan, but all Pakistanis are not ISI. And what I hope is the scholars and those who study see the realities and do not talk by quoting such valueless papers or magazines.
What educational incentives are in place to prevent future generations from extremist ideologies?
I think this is very sure, because the extremist ideology has been a result of tribal life, and today Afghanistan is a Muslim country, and I said that Afghanistan is almost 100% Muslim. Those who are the leaders of the Afghans today, none of them, they are preaching extremism, and all of them, they believe in the right of women, and this is very important. Of course, there are those who do not understand, those who think, they have there are some old people who have their own ideas, but generally the new Afghan generation and even their leaders of different kinds, if you go to Kabul, you will find that nobody is objecting the existence of the girls' school. On the contrary, they give donation for that. But then, once a time, we have the news that a girls' school has been burned by night, by fire in some region of Zabul near Pakistani border. But this does not happen now. I hope it will not happen now. But the 95% of girls in Afghanistan are going to school safely, and this is a guarantee for future.
What is the view of the general population in Afghanistan of the United States' role and their actions in Iraq?
Ooh. Well, the Afghans are, for the time being, there are, I said that there are 10,000 of Americans, GIs, who are busy in the south and southeast area in Afghanistan fighting the remnant of the Taliban. But in spite of that, I think the Afghans, they generally, they avoid to give a judgment on what United States Air Force and other military elements are doing in Iraq, because this is, and they never engage themselves in any kind of declaration. And it is the same with some other countries, like Pakistan is also not very much vocal on what Iraq is doing, the United States is doing in Iraq. But the Shia of Afghanistan, the Shia of Pakistan, they are a little worried about what's happening in the holy sites of Karbala and Najaf, because they would like these countries to be safe from military action. And the Sunnis also, they have sympathy for that.
How exactly do the Afghani people view the American troops that are stationed there right now? Are they seen more as occupiers or more as peacekeepers?
They are viewed as peacekeepers, but there is one point which I would like to express it now, and then your question is encouraging me to say my view about that. It is about some civilians, non-combatants, who were killed with the bombings of the American forces. These civilians, these non-combatants and their children who were killed, they are not more than 5,000 for the 2.5 years, if you count them. But unfortunately, nobody is giving a kind of compensation to them. And the Afghan government has no possibility to do that. I mean, financial possibilities. So therefore, it would be very useful for the United States and because United States people are considered in Afghanistan as country of friends, and this is the Afghan because also in the time of Soviet invasion, there were Americans who helped Afghanistan. Therefore, Americans, they have a good picture in Afghanistan, but to keep it, I think this compensation to be given to the non-combatants killed, to the innocent children killed, I think would be very useful in Afghanistan, and this is a kind of my personal proposal.
Time for just a few more questions. So.
As we approach here in a few months the 3-year anniversary since September 11th, how do you view the strength of Al-Qaeda? Do you see them as stronger since the war on terror and since the opposition in Iraq, or do you see them as weaker?
I think the danger is that one can, I mean, it seems that they have still sympathizers, and these sympathizers generally they are not Iraqis, but some Arabs from whose origin is from Syria or Jordan or Saudi Arabia, like in earlier times, and they are active in Iraq. So these are not generally Iraqis. Because after the defeat in Afghanistan, the Al-Qaeda, some of them, they went to the tribal areas in Pakistan, but some of them, many of them, they tried to reach the Kurdish area, and they were there active because they are always looking for a territory which is when there is a vacuum of power. So they were there. But for today, what is happening against the Shia, what is happening against the Americans, it is against Jordanian embassy or all what is not pro Al-Qaeda. I think it is happening by a group, just a small group of terrorists. It's not so we can say that if the Iraqis security forces, they take care of the terrorists one day, I think, and they are responsible for it. I think there is possibility that like in Afghanistan, they will be defeated.
His Excellency is out of time. We'd like to thank
No,
him.
it's okay. Well, I think there's one.
We'll
Yes,
keep,
yes,
we'll keep having questions.
Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that some of these warlords might become leaders in the future, and some of these warlords have been receiving their funding from illegal drug trade. How can that be something that can be avoided in the future for the Afghani government?
Unfortunately, what the drug trade is not only pushed by the so-called warlords, but there are. It's unfortunate that so many of Afghan farmers have been attracted by this by the drug cultivation has become something which may permit you to survive the lack of revenues in the countryside in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, also the poppy is growing very easily in any terrain, in any climate, and this is also very bad because Afghanistan is very much has the climate of this region of United States, and especially is a mountainous country like here in Utah. But the culture of poppy is growing in all regions of Afghanistan, especially in the northeast, and then nothing serious is done in other countries for preventing the trafficking, unfortunately. So it requires a great cooperation. It requires also new alternative cultivation and to ask because if a farmer has a plot of land and with wheat, if he has poppy, his revenue will be 4 times more. This is unfortunate, and now I think that the government of Mr. Karzai, in spite of all his efforts, has not been able to control the situation. That's a sad story.